toxicity. This is a common, popular, even very sexy topic within the realm of functional medicine science, but it is myth-riddled. This is a topic that we find is perhaps the one that is least well understood by practitioners. Welcome to Functional Medicine for Real-World Impact, where we're diving into the complex, interconnected nature of health and disease, exploring not just theory, but practically what it takes to turn functional medicine insight into powerful, practical, real-world results. So please hit subscribe and let's get started. There are some critical concepts that all practitioners really need to understand. And it's interesting, the topic of toxicity, I find so often one of the biggest missteps is that is at a place where practitioners want to begin. Oh, this person has an autoimmune disease. This person has out of control hypertension or arrhythmia. They have type 2 diabetes. They have asthma. They have some type of chronic disease dynamic, and there's some type of assessment using a variety of tools, qualitative, quantitative, and there's a choice, a decision made that this individual is struggling with toxic overload. And that may be absolutely true. Of course, we're living in a toxic soup, especially here in the modern Western world. It's true for an awful lot of people. However, the intuition to say, let's begin right away in the face of debilitating disease to focus on detoxification, I will assert, is nearly always misguided. And here is why. The vast majority of people that we are supporting in our practices through the functional medicine lens who are wrestling with chronic disease dynamics, they are not wrestling with toxicity because of a single or a few episodic acute toxic exposure. Especially those of you who work in acute or emergency medicine, you know what that looks like. This is often treated at the hospital. It is an acute dynamic that must be dealt with. And I'm not speaking about that today. I'm speaking about the much more prevalent, I would actually say omnipresent dynamic where individuals are struggling with persistent oxidative stress and damage that promotes inflammation as a result of chronic toxin overload. And this has to do not necessarily with any acute exposure, but rather a persistent exposure that overloads their unique body's ability to biotransform and excrete those particular toxins. And the language here is also something I want to talk about right away because we talk a lot about detox. It's quite the catchphrase. But I think something that's important as practitioners to realize is that it is certainly a well-hyped, well-marketed, often exaggerated and overstated concept with all sorts of different promises that are not necessarily anchored in science at all. And I have a real concern with this because it has called out into the light a question of, what is this about toxicity and detox? Is that even a real thing? Is there any credibility to the notion that people need help with detoxification? Yes, there is. But a lot of this sort of marketing hype language around detox programs and helping people with detox, unfortunately, is damaging the credibility of a very real functional imbalance that many of our patients and clients are wrestling with. I actually think it's better perhaps to use language that is scientifically accurate or more targeted, where we talk about toxin overload and helping people to purposefully mobilize additional toxins while simultaneously increasing their ability to biotransform and excrete them. That's actually ideally what you are doing in terms of safe, targeted removal of stored toxic residue in the body, and hopefully on an ongoing future basis, making it so that additional incidence of that toxic overload is less likely because we are identifying gaps in a unique person's physiology, maybe based on genetics, maybe based on diet, maybe based on environment. And we're helping them to support the specific detoxification pathways or phases of detoxification that they may struggle with uniquely so that they're less likely to encounter problems moving forward. But there are many practitioners out there operating from the viewpoint that all toxins must go now. And one of the most common missteps is by focusing on, let's upregulate detoxification. Let's throw a lot of supplements at this. Let's implement fasting, which mobilizes toxins. Let's do a lot to mobilize a lot of toxins, bring them out of there where they're being stored in the body, and in many cases this is in adipose tissue, so that we can better bind it and excrete it. But here's the thing, if individuals have been gathering a toxic burden in their tissues over an extended period of time, and yes, there is good solid scientific evidence to show that this is a thing. This is a scientifically credible concept that is often not credibly spoken of or described, but it is something that many of your patients and clients wrestle with. But it's taking them years, sometimes decades, to accumulate all of those toxins. And especially if someone has in a strong state of oxidative damage or poorly controlled inflammation or some downstream debilitating dynamic, when we mobilize a lot of toxins, we are actually potentially putting that person at risk of great harm, because the body will sequester toxins. There's tremendous wisdom in the body in terms of protecting vital organs and tissues from various insults. We think about the notion of how the body will sequester iron in the form of ferritin in inflammatory states. Of all sorts of types, which protects the body from the very strong oxidative effects of iron. And this is one of the reasons why ferritin can actually be a good, reliable, not so labile marker as an acute phase reactant. Because if your body's wisdom has decided that the threat of acute inflammation, like an infectious dynamic or some type of toxic exposure, if your body believes that the threat has passed and is releasing that sequestered iron, then that is a good resilient marker. Well, similarly, the body is quite adept at storing toxins, taking them out of circulation. And this is why, of course, blood test levels for toxins, especially on their own, are woefully inadequate, because a person may not have notable or even statistically significant levels of circulating toxins. However, they may have quite a bit of in situ stored toxins in various tissues that are creating localized damage in a rich variety of ways. There are many mechanisms of damage that can be created with toxins, and you can actually learn to master. This is the type of deep dive that SAFM features in our training program. You can learn to master where specifically is the role of toxicity in cardiovascular disease, in metabolic disease, in precipitating, say, thyroid disorders, this type of thing, so that you are looking more specifically for what are the common toxic culprits in certain disease dynamics, and how can you best help someone to address them step by step in an effective but in a safe way. An important practitioner pearl is ideally to always increase mobilization of toxins and support biotransformation pathways, especially phase 2 biotransformation pathways, from a place of strength, or at least from a place of stability. We don't want someone with out of control inflammatory or oxidative disease putting more toxins in circulation, because they could actually have some type of an acute exacerbation. An interesting little side story is here in the US, different chelating substances like DMSA used to be available from various supplement companies about 10 or 12 years ago. But there were some unfortunate events with individuals promoting IV supported detoxification with IV chelator therapy that in a couple of cases caused some cardiovascular events, and in a couple of notable cases caused some deaths. And this, of course, really started to highlight that while toxicity is a concern and can be life-threatening, overly aggressive detoxification, especially in a uniquely vulnerable person at a given point in time, could also be disease exacerbating or even potentially acute event or death promoting. Because people may have been storing things like lead or mercury, organic toxins over very large periods of time in relatively small doses. And by using things like what we tend to call chelators in order to promote mobilization, right? We're upregulating phase 3 detoxification, we're bringing those out into circulation and exposing not only the cardiovascular system, but also various organs and glands to the highly debilitating effects of these toxic substances. And this is particularly notable in the case of more insidious toxins that are well stored in other tissue, like heavy metals, such as lead, which we've learned over the years has a preferential affinity for being stored in bone, and something to think about for your perimenopausal or menopausal clients who have started to show surprising ill effects. You want to question the role of toxicity. What might be mobilized from bone tissue as they begin to lose some bone density because of the hormone shifts at this time in life? Lead, for example, is implicated in hypertension, new onset perimenopausal hypertension. You want to be thinking about, might lead that individuals stored a long time ago in their bone tissue, might it be being mobilized now and overloading the body's ability to, first of all, excrete it, but also to deal with the oxidative damage. In this particular example, the endothelial damage that is happening as a result of the highly mobilized lead. It's an interesting consideration. Similarly, so many of us work with people who have concerns about weight loss, and they're interested in a program to achieve targeted weight loss. And some people are doing this quite slowly and a bit more mindfully, but other people are still using high calorie restricted diets or different types of hormonal programs that may promote accelerated weight loss. We need to always make sure that when we are supporting weight loss, that proactively beforehand, we ensure to the best of our ability that detoxification pathways are open and well supported. This is one of the reasons why weight loss may shift the scale, but people may not feel well with weight loss. This may lead to a yo-yo type of weight loss, weight gain. This certainly can have some hormonal origins, but it also could be promoted simply because of the physiological stress that is created when toxins are mobilized. We can get increases in cortisol or even epinephrine, norepinephrine in response to some of the damaging effects of recently mobilized toxins. So we want to think about supporting detoxification in advance of significant weight loss. And of course, this is not a concern typically for more just the slow, steady state, lose a few pounds over a few months type of approach, but where an individual is focused more on wanting to lose 15, 20, 25 pounds, we want to seriously think about the amount of toxins that may have been sequestered, essentially as using adipose tissue as a type of depot storage. There are a lot of myths, many even simple ones that likely we here in this community don't fall prey to. Certainly an awful lot of toxins that humans are exposed to, we don't simply, for example, inhale or swallow, and they are immediately mobilized and excreted in urine. There are some examples of that for sure, but an awful lot of what humans are exposed to, especially in our modern cultures and communities, involve fat-soluble chemicals and toxic substances that actually have to go through a multi-stage biotransformation in order to allow their excretion. Meaning we may readily acquire them, but getting rid of them is not so straightforward and can involve the need to focus on anything from simple excretion pathway opening right? You certainly don't want to promote detoxification in someone who's constipated. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like trying to flush a clogged toilet. It's not going to work out well for anyone. Address the constipation first. Or for someone who is dehydrated and maybe as a result is vulnerable to frequent urinary tract infections or kidney stones, where we would be sending a rich variety of toxic metabolites through the kidneys and the urinary tract. We don't want to do that when that tissue is already struggling. Ideally, we support biotransformation and excretion pathways in the reverse order to ensure that they are open before we upregulate the stage that comes above it. And in this way, we're doing mindful, targeted support of detoxification. And there's a real wisdom to being able to master this. For example, many of the people in your practice who have various states of hyperglycemia, right? Various states of metabolic disease. We know that elevated blood sugar tends to have oxidative effects on a rich variety of tissues, but in particular, the nervous system, the liver, and the kidneys tend to be some of the very first tissues to suffer from oxidative damage. And the last thing we would want to do in the midst of that damage is to upregulate detoxification and basically pour gasoline on an oxidative fire, really risking some significant damage to that tissue. So through these examples, you can see how we want to do this from a place of strength. And again, I'm not talking about the acute singular exposure that has to be addressed aggressively and immediately, often to save a life, but rather more where we know that toxic overload and a residue toxic burden in the body, somewhat behind the scenes, is part of what is at play with regard to the interconnectedness of imbalance in a unique person's body. And so many of the people you're wrestling with these disease dynamics are going to need help from you. And often they'll show up and say, I'm ready to get well. I've got all these diagnoses. I want to do a cleanse. And of course, the onus is on us to educate them to be much more aware about the risks of detoxification and ensuring that a focused detoxification program comes at a logical and appropriate time during their customized intervention plan, right? Rather than having sort of a standard handy-dandy protocol that you use for everyone who has multiple sclerosis or everyone who has type 2 diabetes or everyone who has asthma. Now, of course, there are other myths around toxicity. Let's talk a little bit about exposure. A long-held myth is that the dose makes the poison, and as long as we are having just little teeny low-grade exposure to toxins, it doesn't matter. And nothing could be further than the truth. Research into a rich variety of toxic substances has shown over the years that the dose-response curve for toxins is almost never linear. So the dose makes the poison is almost never accurate. Instead, what we find is all sorts of interesting dose response curves, including a rich variety of non-monatomic curves, where the highest dose to response damage is actually at low doses, where there's a very aggressive negative effect from tiny exposure. And then after that, increasing exposure just gives low-grade residual additional damage. And so the biggest opportunity is to avoid even the tiny exposure. This surprises a lot of practitioners, or where actually you can be exposed for quite some time and there's not that much of a negative effect in terms of physiological response, but then you hit a certain threshold and there's an aggressive, almost exponential effect. This makes toxins much more unpredictable than we might think, not only because of these individual dose response curves, but also because there is a massive role of toxic synergy in promoting disease. There's a hallmark study that was carried out way back in the mid-1970s an animal study that was trying to finally actually study the synergistic toxicity of lead and mercury, understanding that the vast majority of safety studies on toxins are done with one singular toxin. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never met a person who's only exposed to one toxin. We're constantly exposed, not even to just two, but to dozens of different toxins, especially living in the modern Western world with contamination in our air, contamination in our water, in our food, in our cleaning products, our textiles, our personal hygiene products, a huge array of them. And they have synergistic effects that are almost impossible to predict in terms of the unique combination or permutation for a given person. This makes toxic avoidance a really important priority, but because so much of toxicity is embedded in our cultural norms, it makes optimizing detoxification or biotransformation and clearance an essential priority and focus within the practical application of functional medicine science. But in the animal study I'm mentioning, you can take basically a non-toxic level of one heavy metal and combine it with, say, 5%, right? A tiny percent of a known toxic threshold of another toxin. And so theoretically, you think about if the sum of these two parts, right, is additive, we got a non-toxic thing, 100% non-toxic thing, and then we take just a fifth of the lowest known minimal toxic dose and we combine them, not only does it have toxic effects, in this study, it killed all the animals, every single one of them. And yes, we're talking about lead and mercury, some of the most insidious toxins, but this study should stop all of us in our tracks in terms of, okay, whoa, these toxins seriously upregulate the negative effects of one another. And we're not just talking about two. We're exposed to all sorts of different dynamics in our day-to-day experience, from both known and obvious as well as hidden and not so obvious sources of toxins. And so we absolutely need to focus on avoidance, first of all. And I think an inventory of common toxic exposure using a good patient handouts and inventories, sitting down with someone if you work in person, or even having them put all their personal hygiene and beauty products on a table. And even if you're working virtually, have them show you all of them. Teach them about some of the awesome databases and informational resources that are available to the public, where they can learn about the toxicity of some of their particular choices. Things that are affecting our patients' lives on a daily basis are where I recommend we start. Sometimes we focus on the more esoteric things that are only, episodic use. When women get their hair colored, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, how toxic should that product be? Absolutely, that's an important question, but it's not nearly as important as how clean is the air that you're breathing constantly inside your office environment? How clean is the air that you're breathing constantly in your home environment? People think that they have clean homes, but the amount of outgassing that is happening from the vast majority of different textiles and upholstery and fabric treatments in order to make them waterproof, water resistant, or flame retardant. These are, of course, outgassing, right? If it's a warm room, they're outgassing more. A warm room that you're wrestling or snuggling on, outgassing even more. If you take a really warm climate or a really cold climate, people are much less likely to open the windows. So you end up with a bit of a sort of a gaseous toxic slurry that people are breathing in on a regular basis. That is absolutely being inhaled and challenging their unique threshold of how much can the body handle at a given point in time. What we can, we biotransform and excrete readily. What we can't, we store. Some amount of it may remain in circulation, but what we can't, we absolutely can store in a variety of tissues. So we want to be focused on the quality of our our air, the most common thing we're bringing into the body. And then after that, our water. Does the toxicity of food matter? Yes, absolutely. But most of us hopefully are drinking more water, using more water in our food and beverage than we are using one particular food product. We're so focused on having to find the perfect, organic apples, but leaving to the side things like contaminated air. So think about frequency of exposure as being a key consideration with regard to prioritization in toxic avoidance. Another often overlooked topic has to do with transdermal absorption of toxins. I teach my own clients to think about their skin as being a giant mouth, which it is. And ultimately, we should not slather anything on our skin that we would not be willing to eat. Not from the perspective of taste or flavor, but from the perspective of, is this safe? What's this going to do in my body? Yes, we only have partial uptake of substances through the skin, but we're actually much better protected from toxins that might come in through the gut, whether it's from our microbiome or from first pass hepatic clearance. Once things are absorbed from the gut, there's a lot of protection for what you swallow. What you slather on your skin, some portion of it goes automatically into circulation throughout the body. And in various countries, it certainly varies, but here in the US, there is way more toxic oversight into what is allowed in food as opposed to what is allowed in personal hygiene, beauty, and cleaning products. And for example, in personal hygiene products, the current regulatory tenets allow, for example, manufacturers to hide a massive variety of toxic chemicals inside the ubiquitous word fragrance. And as long as a company declares that they have various chemicals that they shove into that basket, that single layer basket, are part of their proprietary formula for their product, then they don't have to report it. And so you end up with a massive number of toxic substances, in particular phthalates, being captured inside a word that so many of our patients just ignore. Fragrance, like, oh, how toxic could fragrance possibly be, right? It's probably essential oil. No, it's not. Why would a company not tell you if it's something pure and clean and of interest like an essential oil? So being concerned about helping them to do a more keen and careful inventory of their personal hygiene and beauty products, especially because so many endocrine disrupting chemicals are hiding inside personal hygiene and beauty products. They tend to be things that people use every single day, and they are using them not only synergistically in life, but synergistically even in the episode of getting ready for the day. Think about your typical person, especially typical woman. If she's getting up in the morning and getting ready for the day. So this is going to involve a shower and fixing her hair and brushing teeth and using a mouthwash and applying makeup and hairspray and moisturizer. It can be dozens, literally, of products all being applied at once. This can actually present an incredible episodic daily synergistic toxic uptake into her body. And so many of these organic chemicals found in beauty products, as I said earlier, endocrine disrupting chemicals that can have marked effects on hormone balance, that can affect anything from ovulatory stability to thyroid function. And so we have to think about exposure. Another common transdermal exposure is thinking about people who use dryer sheets. I can't stand this product. People don't like for there to be static cling if they use an electric dryer. And I know in some communities it's not a very common appliance, but here in the US it's incredibly common. And dryer sheets, they're loaded with chemicals, and in particular tend to include a very high dose of fragrance. So that basically you cleaned your clothes and then you're going to put them in the dryer with with basically the equivalent of a stamp that's going to stamp toxic chemicals back over ideally every single little square inch of the surface in the dryer. So when you remove it and fold it and then later put it on your body, it's basically newly dirty again. It's newly toxic again. Of course, skin that is moist to any degree is much more likely to pick up and absorb this toxic residue from products. And so simple things like moving people away from using any dryer sheets whatsoever. These are the types of more hidden toxic exposures that we can educate clients about. But let's talk about biotransformation of toxins, because this is also a real myth-riddled topic. And as I mentioned earlier, the concept to focus on is individual toxin overload. The reality is that some people, just based on diet and environment and genetics, they will handle toxins that they are exposed to, which is fantastic, right? We are designed to biotransform and excrete toxins from an innate physiology viewpoint, but this is perhaps one of the best examples of an evolutionary mismatch between the day-over-day lifestyle choices that we want to make that can be now incompatible with or associated with dysregulation of an innate physiological capability in the human body. It's not that we can't biotransform and excrete toxins. We can. The challenge is that many of us are living lives that are presenting too many toxins at once for what we have an ability to handle in the moment, and therefore minimize toxin storage. And of course, this has a lot to do with nutrients. Because of course, the biotransformation of toxins, which includes 4 phases, right? Phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, they are all nutrient dependent. And where we work with so many individuals in our practices who are eating crap food diets that are loaded with calories and chemicals, but are not whole natural foods that are replete with nutrients, not just vitamins and minerals, but the thousands of different phytonutrients that our physiology responds to. And phytonutrients is really the celebrity from a food viewpoint, because various phytonutrients found in whole fresh foods support the upregulation of various genes and enzymes, either from a more of an indirect epigenetic or from a direct enzyme effect, in order to enhance the activity of that enzyme. It might be a CYP enzyme that is carrying out phase 1 detoxification, or it might be the NRF2 gene and enzyme that is or gene and enzymes that are supporting various pathways of detoxification, like glutathione synthesis and recycling reduction. This is where food is absolutely essential, and we need to make sure, ideally, that people are well supporting their body with the nutrients that they need to support these various pathways before we recommend they do a lot of fasting, which mobilizes toxins, or before we recommend they spend much time in an infrared sauna, which mobilizes toxins, or before they're taking high doses of a binder, which will increase mobilization of toxins, much less using an overt chelator. There is a wisdom to how we approach this, and you can learn to really master it so that you can miss or step aside from some of these common pitfalls. Because once the toxins are in our bodies, we're talking about increasing oxidative damage, causing damage to cell membranes, being taken up into the intracellular environment and damaging mitochondria, impairing the mitophagy process that helps to ensure the constant recycling and renewal of our mitochondria. Certain heavy metals can actually displace other nutrient minerals You know, things like lead and mercury and cadmium and arsenic end up replacing things like zinc and calcium and magnesium in various molecules and rendering those biochemical pathways less effective. We can upregulate inflammation. Well, we've learned that various toxins play a key role in triggering the activation of NF-kappa B in terms of promoting immune hypervigilance and exacerbating various immunological diseases like asthma and chronic allergy, but also increasing predisposition for autoimmune disease. We can end up having a direct decimating effect on our microbiome and our gut because of toxic exposure. I already mentioned some hormone dysregulation that can affect actual molecular mimicry of hormones, where certain toxins actually look enough like a given hormone that they can fit in the receptors and activate them. Other chemicals affect the receptor behavior. Other chemicals affect the behavior of the enzymes that enable detoxification. It's one of the most insidious effects is the number of toxins that impair your body's ability to get rid of them. Talk about a great reason to avoid them. And these simple stories and explanations are things that we must master if we want to galvanize our patients' passion and commitment to making change. At SAFM, we teach you deep, rigorous science and then the customized practical application of that science to particular cases. And then we practice with case after case after case to build your confidence. But part of that practice, part of that customization is educating your patient in a way that they can understand, which means you can't use medical ease or, highfalutin scholarly speak, because your average patient's not going to understand at all what you're speaking about. Your complicated language may make them more overwhelmed. It may make them more afraid. And people who are afraid will be compliant. But one of the biggest challenges with facilitating lifestyle change and helping your patients to actually get well and stay well is that as people start to feel a little better, they stop being afraid. And when they stop being afraid, they tend to stop being compliant. And this is a constant perpetuating what I call the revolving door of disease, where people don't get well and stay well because you haven't galvanized their commitment to lifestyle change. You analyzed their case. You were the hero in the case. You told them what to do. You use fear as a motivator. And the clinical encounter was practitioner centric and the patient got lost, as opposed to having the patient be at the center of the healthcare encounter and the essential role of the practitioner to educate, inspire, and empower the patient. Because when an individual who's been suffering, typically for quite some time, has an aha because you used simple explanations, simple analogies and stories that helped a patient to go, oh, wow, really? I get it. For the first time, I understand. So this is causing this and this causes this and this is why I have this disease. Wow, I had no idea. That makes perfect sense to me now. I feel so empowered. I'm going to go home and change my life. Tell my spouse, tell all my friends, Google a whole bunch of more information. I'm going to take ownership of my health. People can't unknow an aha that you helped them to have because you used selective storytelling and simple analogies to help them actually understand what is at play in their body. Because when people become galvanized about what is at play in their body, they're way more likely to actually be in strong, committed, savvy clinical partnership with you, change their lives, get amazing clinical outcomes, get better and stay better, which is fulfilling for you as a practitioner. And oh, by the way, they will probably write for you what is very common amongst our students, the most amazing testimonial ever, which is better marketing for your practice than absolutely anything that you would ever write. Because it's social proof, and the vast majority of your patients in grateful reciprocity for what you have helped them to achieve, they are more than happy to do a little video testimonial or to write a rich glowing review of what it was like to work with you. And you collect a basket of these, and they will do the vast majority of your practice marketing for you. So some essential concepts in order to make sure your clients and patients are set up for success. Now let's talk a little bit about nutrients, and we don't have too much time today, but I really want to make you aware of some pitfalls to look for. First of all, any of your female patients who are using oral estrogen containing drugs. Now, this could be oral estrogen from a hormone repletion viewpoint, but way more commonly, women will be using oral contraceptives. And research clearly shows that over time, because most people don't take contraceptives for just a few months or even a few years, most women are taking oral contraceptives for decades. It becomes so much of a normal that they may even forget to tell you they're taking them. But this can deplete nutrients. And in particular, because of the way the estrogen in this medication affects the serotonin system in the enteric nervous system in the gut, depletes vitamin B6. And vitamin B6 is an often overlooked B vitamin in the realm of detoxification. We talk all the time about the celebrity B vitamin, folate, right? Seems we can't talk enough about vitamin B9 and how essential it is, courtesy of the widespread availability of SNP testing specifically for MTHFR genetic variants. But of course, folate doesn't work alone. B vitamins don't ever work alone, ever, which is why you want to be very careful about ever recommending just a single B vitamin supplement, other than maybe vitamin B12 for targeted purposes that you can learn. But otherwise, you want to use a B complex, and you want to learn when it may make sense to have more B6 versus less. There is a science to master here. But when vitamin B6 is depleted, this affects methylation, but for reasons you may not expect. Most of us are focused on the sort of the importance of methylation because we've been told that homocysteine is a bad thing. Homocysteine is a pro-inflammatory amino acid that when it builds up can wreak havoc in a variety of functional balances. But homocysteine is not innately evil. Homocysteine is an amino acid that the body generates on purpose as a raw material going into the transsulfuration process to make glutathione. You have to make homocysteine. You want it in order to make glutathione. And one of the reasons sometimes why people have too much of a buildup of homocysteine is not because their methylation cycle isn't working well. It's because the downstream transsulfuration process is not working well. And what is missing is adequate vitamin B6. People can have genetic variants in different genes, like the CBS gene, that helps to metabolize homocysteine in order to isolate bioavailable cysteine to make glutathione. So vitamin B6 is something to think about and how often that is missing. And it can be for more advanced or esoteric reasons. That tends to be what functional medicine focuses on so much. But a huge number of people in your practice are using oral estrogen containing contraceptives, especially if you just have the general public of adults in your practice. And so this is the type of dynamic you want to be on the lookout for. For that matter, thinking about the essential nature of glutathione, we could talk all day about it from the context of toxicity and detoxification. But glutathione is a topic that is going to be top of mind for us, I think, for quite some time because of COVID. We've certainly learned that dramatic oxidative stress and damage is a hallmark of the multifactorial damage that a bad case of COVID or a bad reaction to an mRNA COVID injection can have. And there's published studies now, actually, I think with really dramatic, where you actually see the decimation in reduced glutathione that happens even when someone has just a moderate case of COVID. There's maybe a 50, 70, 80% reduction in reduced glutathione, which, by the way, makes everything else that they had already on board before the COVID much, much worse in terms of debilitating effect on the body. So it shouldn't surprise us that people have long COVID. Oh my goodness. The person who already had hypertension, regardless of whether it was being well controlled with medication, the person who already had type 2 diabetes, regardless of whether it was being well controlled with medication, they went into an experience with COVID disease and they exited from it with much, much lowered protection against the chronic disease they've had for decades. And so, yeah, they're suffering and they're going to continue to suffer for quite some time until someone like you helps them to identify the functional balance that's probably been at play in their body for decades. And while their type 2 diabetes or their hypertension has been being treated from a disease viewpoint, no one's been looking at their unique cluster of functional imbalances that probably caused the disease in the first place 11, 18, 24, 31 years ago. And so they've been limping along, certainly increasing their risk of dying sooner or picking up other secondary and tertiary downstream diseases like cardiovascular disease in the case of hypertension, like even autoimmune disease in the case of type 2 diabetes. But once they have COVID, it basically is pulling down the veil, pulling down the curtain of a false sense of wellness these individuals had been given. Because we were treating a disease does not make them well at all. It does not make them healthy at all. What COVID exposed is basically a vulnerability, right? All sorts of functional imbalances behind the scenes that were just further depleted by COVID. That certainly an acute case of COVID may have created, but in the many cases of COVID that I have seen and that we've covered and discussed amongst our practitioner community here at SAFM, these are vulnerabilities that people brought to the COVID arena. And of course they're exacerbated after COVID. But they didn't start with COVID. This is the illusion that so many people are living under now. They thought they were fine. They thought they were well. They thought they were healthy, even though they had 7 diagnoses and they were taking 6 medications to manage those chronic diseases. This is part of the fallacy of disease management, part of the fallacy of our modern conventional healthcare model. And so COVID is exposing functional imbalances and just how debilitating they can be. And you, as a practitioner who can really gain masterful capability and confidence in using functional medicine in your practice across a rich variety of modalities, you are perfectly positioned to support people struggling with long haul COVID, because we don't focus on the disease. We focus on who is this person and what are the unique cluster of functional imbalances that are creating their unique experience. We've identified so far, I think, the really solid 12 or 14 disease dynamics, some subset of which is at play in each person who's suffering from long COVID. And no, we don't need a handy dandy chart of how to treat every single person who has it, because people don't have the same thing. Out of that list of 12, your patient Bob may have these 2 or 3, which is why he has brain fog and memory loss and cognitive impairment. But your patient Mary, who's going to come in tomorrow, may have a completely different set of functional imbalances on the other side of her COVID, which is why she doesn't have those neurological symptoms. But she still has shortness of breath. She has episodic arrhythmia, and she has a dramatically higher resting pulse now than she did pre-COVID. We can't use the same protocol for those 2 people just because we call it long COVID. That's ridiculous. That is short-circuiting and taking a superficial swipe at being efficient in practice and doing the patient a massive disservice. This is about doubling down on our need to be much more capable as practitioners so that we're not dependent on handy-dandy charts. We can actually assess unique individuals and customize what they need. This is something you absolutely can learn to do. And so we have to pay attention to this in particular for COVID, because people are not only struggling with the oxidative stress and damage effects of an immune battle, right? Which is happening all throughout the body, especially where there are a lot of ACE2 receptors, right? Unfortunately, in blood vessels, but also in places that surprise a lot of practitioners, like in the gut. The oxidative damage from the immune battle from COVID in the gut can do dramatic damage to the mucosal integrity of the gut and lead to nutrient malabsorption. So you're trying to help them to replete nutrients on the other side of COVID, but their nutrient stores are not going up. Well, that's because you haven't healed the gut. It can be contributing to enhanced intestinal permeability. We end up with elevated levels of different pro-inflammatory cytokines, in particular like interleukin 6, which we know is a common culprit in the inflammation profiles common in COVID. Well, interleukin 6 increases blood-brain barrier permeability. Now you're talking about people not only being toxic from the neck down, but having increased vulnerability to neurotoxicity because they had COVID. And so this is an essential example of just a simple one of millions of different scenarios we could discuss of bio-individual vulnerability and consideration related to toxicity and its effects. For that matter, there are pathways in the body that we need to support in order to deal with biotransforming and excreting these exogenous chemicals and toxins. But some of those very same pathways are used by endogenous biochemicals that the body uses on a daily basis. You know, pathways like the COMT pathway or the COMT pathway that the body uses in order to affect phase 2 biotransformation of things like stress hormones like epinephrine, norepinephrine, to biotransform estrogen, so that it is less estrogenic, which is important for appropriate hormonal effects in both men and women, but also to ensure that those estrogen metabolites are less carcinogenic. We need methylation to support that pathway. But there's a lot of competition going on in the body for methyl groups, for various phase 2 pathways. And then you want to learn about some of the oh so common lifestyle choices that impair phase 1 detoxification. And then even if we're boosting phase 1, we end up with partial biotransformation or partial detoxification, which is basically taking a substance and making it more polar, but not polar enough to be water soluble so the body can get rid of it. So the toxin is still stuck, but now it's more dangerous. Now it is able to wreak oxidative damage. Well, on an intracellular basis, how do we protect ourselves from that? Well, from things like glutathione, which has been decimated by your COVID. We have got to be the practitioners that are present for the waves and waves and waves of people who are suffering. And unfortunately, I think this suffering is going to continue for the foreseeable future in our practices. We've got to be there, prepared, capable, confident, and supported by a passionate, warm, reinforcing community of practitioners so that we can do this work. Because the auspicious occasion for functional medicine to shine is never going to be more prominent than it is right now. And these individuals who are struggling with these different chronic diseases that they've had for years, these are also individuals who started off with disadvantages, right? People who were born with the C-section. So they already ended up with a disadvantaged microbiome, and they were likely already born who had massive exposure to increased toxins as children, as very young children. When we need to remember that for the first couple of years of life, a young child's biotransformation pathways are not fully mature. This is where especially the infant is highly dependent on breastfeeding and on the mother's detoxification capability in order to protect the child. And so when we're not breastfeeding, this is something that is taken away in terms of early life support. So making sure we're doing good histories and understanding what people may have been exposed to in utero or at childbirth or in the first couple of years of life that may have predisposed them to more toxic burden or more toxic overload vulnerability as they aged. And so we certainly could be talking about this for hours and hours. And if what I've described to you today, if it resonates with you and you can't wait to say yes to rising to this much higher level of not just knowledge. Knowledge is cheap. You can get knowledge anywhere, but actual clinical capability and confidence so you can be in the flow of healthcare transformation, not on the sidelines with knowledge, but truly capable and confident. Right? Truly capable and confident. So it's not overwhelming to do functional medicine. You don't struggle with imposter syndrome or feeling like you're too dependent on protocols that you follow, but deep down inside, you don't actually know exactly how and why they work. We want better for you than that. We know that your passion, your calling is compelling you to actually be in the movement for healthcare transformation. I want to express my gratitude for taking time out to join me today. Even if you just pick up a few pearls today to improve the way you show up and do this work. I know that takes time. I know we're all very busy, and I'm grateful for your commitment to continuously advancing your learning through the functional medicine lens. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good day.